Good morning, and thanks for joining me for today's FS Club webinar on the fast evolving world of digital healthcare, where we'll be discussing the expanding reach of digital care into the hospital management and community care space, how tech platforms and clinical product propositions are consolidating, recent merger and acquisition deals, and the trends outlook for the future. It is my pleasure to introduce Alan Hughes to you this morning. To some of you, Alan will be a familiar face, as this is his fourth webinar with the FS Club, and his analysis and insights into the digital healthcare space always prove insightful and interesting. So we're very fortunate to be hearing from him again today. Alan brings 20 years of international healthcare advisory experience, working alongside policymakers on the latest international trends. He is a regular panellist and healthcare commentator at summits across Europe and the Gulf. Before starting an independent consultancy, LIT Healthcare Ltd in 2020, Alan worked as a healthcare management consultant and policy strategist at KPMG. And prior to this, he was in investment banking on Wall Street and the City of London at Lehman Brothers and Dresdner Kleinwort, working on 30 M&A healthcare transactions, and 5 IPOs. Now, before I hand over to Alan, the brief usual housekeeping points from me. So I'm Charlotte Dawber-Ashley and I manage the FS Club here at ZN. I'd like to warmly acknowledge our very generous sponsors who enable us to continue to bring you a wide range of thought-provoking content across finance, technology, economics, and a bit of healthcare today. The slides for this presentation are publicly available on our website and in the chat box. We'll be recording the session and it will be available to watch on our website within 48 hours. And there'll be a 20-minute Q&A after the presentation. So send your questions into me early and then I'll feed the conversation. It'll be great to get your views on this topic. And also Alan's contact details are in the slides so you can follow up with him directly. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to hand over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Charlotte. No, it is genuinely great to be back, and hard to believe this is the fourth of these conversations that we have regarding digital healthcare. So I'll run through the materials in a second, but I think it's an opportunity today to sort of take stock on what's happened in the last 4 years. Pre and during and now post-COVID in the context of digital care. And I do enjoy these conversations because it is great to look back at what we thought would happen and some things that did, and then looking forward again to the next 12 months. So Sasha, if you could kindly go to the next page, please. Lovely. So I'll give you a taster for what we'll cover today, as in from whose perspectives and what types of digital care. Some of this will be familiar from previous conversations, but I think it's worth just recapping on the scope. But I think the key exam question is to understand who or what parts of healthcare systems are becoming more digital, who's deploying the most solutions in the use of digital care and digital solutions. So from the top, I use this phrase, the front office, middle and back office. So the front office implies the patient facing, so where the clinician faces a patient, either using virtual care via video or images or chat, or then also the huge emergence of medical education in recent years due to COVID and then more recently. So they're sort of core areas of digital care that we'll cover today. I won't get into AI, very tempting, and I might reflect on the use of algorithms and predictive technologies, things like that, but it's a huge world, and I think as you've seen in the media in recent weeks, it's becoming more and more complex from a regulatory perspective. Taking the analogy of front office further, I refer to middle office as the hospital or an acute setting, where typically you have business-to-business activities. So you as the CEO or you as the head of risk in a hospital might have regulatory requirements, and you would use an automated or maybe an online solution as the previous less automated solutions to respond to your regulatory requirements. And then back office is a mix of maybe testing platforms that previously were manual or maybe are now becoming more automated. So they're things like diagnostics and labs and so on. And I will break these down in more detail later on, I promise. And all of the above is discussed from the perspective of an investor An investor can be a private investor or a venture capitalist, or even from the management team of a hospital, like, should we put more money into this and develop? And then from a care provision, as in, how does it impact the quality of care? How does it help the clinician to access more patients and give better care? And then last but not least, government and policy. What is the latest on policy, at least at a global level, and then bearing in mind that a lot of that will be impacted at a local health system level. But the aim again is to support thoughts on stakeholder decision making, raise your awareness for trends, and just spot developments. So go ahead, please, Sasha, to the next page. Thank you. So in case you do need to disappear, I thought I'd throw in the summary up front of what the conclusions are, which I'll obviously break down. But from those three perspectives of investors, care providers, and policymakers, the headlines are that if you look at the US, North American markets, the funding of digital care, which is predominantly private, has peaked. So the exam question for today is what's happening in the rest of the world? And then you have what's happening to the valuations of listed digital care. By listed, I mean stock exchange listed, and how they were impacted by the 2022 tech sell-off. And then importantly, because this is an important piece for younger, smaller companies, that the private funding of privately held companies is becoming more and more important. So it's important that they receive ongoing funding, which is important. And I'm pleased to say that a lot of valuations are resilient. There have been some down rounds which we can discuss, as in rounds that were executed at a lower valuation than the previous valuation, but they are reasonably resilient compared to listed stocks. Care providers definitely seeing accelerated adoption of digital solutions during and post-COVID. During COVID out of necessity, but post-COVID due to workforce shortages. An initial focus was on that front office piece, so the virtual patient care, and now a more increased focus on the in-house solutions. Recently, I'm seeing a lot more white label solutions, so where a technology company would go into a hospital and say, we will provide X for you, and rather than having the brand of the company on that for rostering or regulatory, you would have an in-house white label solution for hospital X, so that they have their own branding. And then policy-wise, this is the big one. So I'll cover what I can, because in healthcare provision is a national game. Every economy has its own regulatory system, and even then, as on the continent, countries like Italy, France, Germany, you have federal systems each of which have their own healthcare regulatory and funding. So this is a big area of development as digital care settles. So early days on policy. Next page, please, Sasha. Okay, so the aim of this page is to recap on the last 4 years. And what I did, Charlotte, was I just captured the Q&A that we had coming in at the end of each session. I didn't capture them all, but this is just to give our current our delegates today a flavour of what people were asking in the last few years, which is interesting given where we are. So across the top you have the years and then the key themes. So I'll go through the key themes of each year and then the Q&A. So in 2020, COVID, this was around May, June 2020, so COVID was definitely here. So the question was, what is digital care and how far can we push it? And this was to help see patients and treat patients given the restrictions and pressures that all the health systems were under. 2021, the question then was, well, what can we digitize? What's feasible? So vendors and technology solutions were rolling out lots of platforms, but the questions from the panel were, how can these companies engage, as in who will pay for it, and how do they deploy the systems? Is it at a hospital level, at a local GP level, at a national level? So that led to frameworks, as in tendering frameworks emerging from health systems, and special funds being dedicated by governments for digital care, which we've seen in recent, and definitely in the last 18, 24 months. Last year, I think the sort of thesis, Charlotte, was it's time to get digital, it's accepted. So we had that accelerated adoption. And then the questions last year were from private medical insurers who asked, well, okay, we provide a lot of healthcare insurance for, if I can use the phrase, normal inpatient, very, let's call it patient-facing care, should we increase our products for our insured population to include virtual care? And so there has been a significant emergence in the last 12 months on things like well-being solutions, so offering corporates who have health insurance policies for their employees, offering them much more products around well-being and let's say virtual care type solutions. And then this year it's who's getting digital and where is the pace of reform settling. I think if you're to invite me back, and I'd love if you would, Charlotte, but I think if we were to have a debate next year, it'll be around, well, where is policy and what is being regulated? And dare I say it, there will be a lot of teething problems there, as you recognise from your public affairs background, as it does take times for governments to get familiar with what needs to be regulated or not. But the bottom line there is we've moved from resilience, so using digital care to be resilient, to accepting it, while there continues to be an unprecedented patient demand for care in the traditional setting of hospitals and so on. The next slide, please, Sasha. Thank you. So we'll just do one more page on the key points, and then we'll get into the sort of investor considerations. So pressures on the ground worsen. I won't go through these in detail, but from a care context, we continue to have workforce shortages in every sector, but in fairness, healthcare has had significant shortages for a long time, leading to unprecedented demand. Sadly, there's spiking dissatisfaction among the public. The Financial Times, I think it's doing a survey once a month, but it reflects either in the UK, from a UK perspective, dissatisfaction emerging from the public with the NHS, and then growing dissatisfaction at a staff level, which obviously we saw with the nursing and recent doctor strikes. Adoption themes, look, there's a greater acceptance from the clinical fraternity of the pressure to innovate, to align digital capability. Doctors are more encouraged to bring their own device, BYOD, bring their own device and use that to align with smart medical devices in the hospital. So adoption and acceleration is increasing. So the drivers of adopting digital care remain the workforce environment and the increasingly complex patient needs, and aligned with cautious adoption in certain areas. Next page, please. Okay. So this is not the most detailed analysis, and I'm sure the bubbles could be more accurately sized, but sort of from the left, I picked two big listed companies, Teladoc in the US, and then Babylon, a UK business that ultimately did a New York listing via an SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company, and then Ada, which is a German privately held business that's linked to Siemens, actually. So if you just focus on the top two, so Teladoc and Babylon, you can see how their valuations of 12 billion and 2 billion respectively early 2020 ballooned during 2021, reasonably consistent during early 22, but for the last half of 2022 and early 23 have sunken significantly back to, dare I say it, more reasonable. Now $4 billion is still a big valuation for a company, and it's trading reasonably well. Babylon has had other challenges that I won't go into here, but I think the two companies give a sense that these companies listed on stock exchanges have been impacted by the tech sell-off of the last 6 to 9 months. So I think while it might feel unfair to give such a broad brush, but some of those companies will have been caught in that tech sell-off. But the fundamentals remain that there is a market here if those companies continue addressing it. I will get into the private companies in a second. So actually, that's probably, if we go to the next page, please, and we'll jump into privately funded companies. So look, I have to say, I took this page from CB Insights, which does a very good digital care quarterly update. So forgive the branding, but it does give a feel for where we went from 2018, 2019 until the end of last year. The curve represents the number of funding deals, so not M&A deals, but the funding deals. And then the bar chart reflects the actual quantum. And I'll show you on the next, before we turn page, this is predominantly a US story. So of that 3.4 billion in the last quarter of 2022, over, I think it's 70%, 75% of that was US, as we'll see on the next page. But the exam question here is, that's a very much US-centric picture. Where is the rest of the world? And let's think NHS, let's think the European systems, let's think the Middle East and ASPAC. Because every system has its own dynamics. So I remain confident that these companies will be needed, and that we're not on a similar cycle as to the US in terms of that roller coaster, dare I say it. So the next page, please, Sasha. So that page, the aim of this page is simply to show you that most of the activity for the last few years, and that snapshot of Q4 2022, was dominated by US venture capitalist funding and activity, and you can see the tiny size of the circles across the world that follow. So my prediction is that many countries outside the US will follow in terms of funding and deal flow, both funding and M&A. And also, interestingly, you'll start to see more companies seeking exits or selling to larger corporates, because they've either grown to a certain size, they need funding, but they have a good product. So bottom line there is that US is peaking, the rest of the world now catching up. Go ahead, please, Sasha. Okay, so the headlines from close on the US piece is we've seen a 57% drop in digital care funding in 2022 compared to 2021. There were 0 unicorns born at the end of 22. That's the analogy for a digital company with $1 billion plus valuation. So that's definitely softening. And then the appearance of down rounds, which we mentioned earlier, is where company X may have done a valuation 2 years ago and has come back to market more recently and has come out at a valuation lower than its valuation of 2 years ago. So some of those are appearing. But finding a positive is that there's much more consolidation. So smaller companies are being acquired by bigger companies who are looking for new solutions, new software as a solution platform. From a European perspective, there's been a 20% increase year on year, so that's catching up. ASPAC, MENA, I don't know, but I suspect that they'll be following Europe as well. So the fundamentals driving digital care continue. Market segments are forming, and we will get into that in a second as to that segmentation. But very importantly, the private funding market remains key to really support those younger companies bringing solutions and to support the healthcare systems across the world. Next page, please, Sasha. Okay, so this isn't a brilliant page, so I'll just give you the highlights. So the aim here is to capture what are the problems which healthcare providers, healthcare payers, for example, medical insurers, and then payers from a state perspective. So without going in through all the bullets, hospitals need help to automate certain management activities, rostering, regulatory, and so on. Medical insurers are asking themselves, what care should we include? Our insured base, our premium holders want a more developed and broader package. And then payers are trying to navigate their own central government policy to make more care available at a ground level. So they're the hurdles that, and it's a very broad brush, but from a provider, payer, as in private payer, medical insurer, and then state payer, and then what's emerging against those. So I mentioned earlier that hospitals are adopting white label technical solutions. Companies are appearing to provide post-acute, especially in oncology, virtual care, and this phrase virtual wards, which we'll get into in a second. Some medical insurers and private hospitals actually are adopting virtual GP services. Circle BMI, one of the largest, if not the largest, private hospital group in the UK, did a joint venture recently in exactly that space. And then other on-call nursing solutions. InsurTech is a big area, Charlotte, that I think you probably cover in other parts of this, which I won't get into, but obviously InsurTech is a huge developing market around automation of insurance processes and systems. And then on the payer, on the state side, I think this links to the policy piece, but there is a recognition of the benefits at a state and national level to deploying digital care. So I suppose the bottom line again is that digital care solutions which enable patients to access clinicians, doctors, and enable those clinicians to see more patients and spend more, let's say, address the condition, they're the businesses that will succeed. If you go to the next page, please. Thank you. Okay. So there's quite a lot here, but I think it paints a good picture of the end-to-end use of digital care. So across the top, there are lots of digital care solutions coming to market to address the patient-facing, the middle office, as in hospital management, and then back office, which is typically the diagnostics, the labs, the testing, and the maybe more automated areas, and then community care, which I won't get into much detail on today, but I will mention some of the solutions appearing. So solutions which are needed to help the front office, so virtual care, they're things like clinical software as a solution solutions. So that's where a clinician needs help with decision making, reporting, access to patient information. And then the middle piece, and the reason I've highlighted within the walls of the hospital with the dotted line is this is the area where I'm seeing the most adoption, without doubt. And if I can speak openly, it's because there are, let's say, there are fewer external stakeholders involved. At a hospital level, if you're rolling out a rostering solution, it's something you can do within the walls of the hospital, within reason, obviously, as opposed to very highly regulated types of care at a patient level. So areas like digital care solutions for regulatory reporting, and by that I mean regulatory reporting and even financial reporting, medical education, rostering, and then responding to risk management. So let's say a hospital receives an unfavorable rating, how can it be addressed? Is the deployment of digital care or digital solutions available or feasible to fix those? And then another area I'm very excited about is let's call it the back office, or the area of the hospital where you have huge testing capability, laboratory analyzers, or in a non-hospital sense, you might refer to it as business processing, but where there's testing and reporting. And this is a natural blend, a natural bridge to the community from a hospital perspective. So in terms of areas, I'm seeing a lot of success from an investment and growth company at a company level, definitely in the middle, and also in the back office. I'm going to state the obvious, but during COVID, naturally companies in the laboratory and testing space grew incredibly. A lot of them have since either folded or merged, but there are a lot of solutions still needed in that testing space, aside from the obvious demand of COVID 2 years ago. So capabilities to monitor from an investor, from a provider, from a policy perspective would be areas like clinical decision-making, rostering tools, and then those testing back offices, because they all enable workforce. They enable clinicians to see more patients, enable more hospital management to provide more capability, and so on. Next page, please, Sasha. I'm conscious we're coming up to time, Charlotte, so I'll just rattle through this one. So last year, some of the questions, Charlotte, were on which companies are starting to appear in this area. So obviously I'll leave this slide with Charlotte and Sasha for our delegates today. But in a nutshell, they're the companies that have grown or emerged over the last 4 or 5 years. Some of them are billion-dollar plus businesses. Some of them are still small, mid-cap in terms of size. But left to right of primary care, you have remote consultations, disease management, scheduling and rostering, and then telemonitoring. So that's the diagnostics and testing piece. And then there's a proliferation of online prescriptions. Like this is a huge area of growth. And then at the acute level, as in hospital level, solutions emerging to help clinicians to look after their patients, like X-Wave, like carology. Carology, for example, is for oncology patients to help them after they leave the hospital. Robotic surgery, huge area I won't get into today, but just Medtronic is a company that's investing hundreds of millions in this space. So robotic surgery is obviously an area of excitement. And then Doc Planner is another example of a company providing scheduling and software solutions. So just in the interest of time, Sasha, you can go to the next page, please. Yeah, so to close on the who will survive, the companies that will be successful, and I'm talking about success, I mean to be able to fund their business and continue growing, will be the ones that have product breadth, so they bring more than one solution to a care provider. They're well funded to survive market hurdles, that they design their solutions as a security by design, and that they align with the traditional providers. So rather than taking work or taking care activities away from the traditional care providers like hospitals, that they align with them and help them to provide more care. So the bottom line here is that winners, as in companies that grow and succeed, tend to be well funded, either independently or via joint ventures with traditional providers. Go ahead, please, Sasha. Okay, so we went 1 or 2 minutes over time there, Charlotte, but I think just to close on the conclusions from the beginning, and hopefully I've elaborated on those over the last 25 minutes, but the key points there are investors, care providers and policy continue to be supportive and involved in this very important area of care. And the conclusions are that the areas that will continue to see the most growth are areas within the hospital walls or in that sort of middle office space, with the rationale being that you have fewer stakeholders and you have a little bit more control on your rollouts. And then I think if you were to invite me back next year, I think the big question will be, where is government in all of this? Because some governments are racing ahead. So the German government has its well-known DiGA law, that's capital D, small I, G-A law, which is encouraging clinicians to deploy digital care. But that's still early days in how it's funded and how it's rolled out. Lots of health systems have special digital care packages. So I think it's early days on the policy, but very happy to try and answer questions during the Q&A session, Charlotte.
Thanks very much, Alan. That was really interesting. We'll definitely be inviting you back next year. Just thinking about the whole sort of patient user experience in this, I know in the UK over the past 12 months in particular, it's been so hard to get GP appointments. People have really been struggling, which has been putting pressure on emergency departments. And I won't name the one, but for the past couple of years, I've been using an app, digital healthcare provider. I do all my prescriptions online, I have GP appointments online, which generally means you can speak with a GP within sort of 24 to 48 hours. But the sort of issues I've had is sometimes they've said we need to assess you in person within, say, 2 days max, and then their next available GP appointment is in 3 weeks. So they end up saying you just have to go to the emergency department anyway. And I mean, it's a great point of service up until that point, because they do have those physical offices available, but there's clearly not enough. So I don't know what your view is on that.
No, it's a wonderful example, Charlotte. So thanks for sharing it. So if the exam question is how can we help the system to respond to that consistent? There will always be a need for a family doctor. Like there will always be a need for certain clinical activities which require that face-to-face piece. That'll never go away. I think what hopefully. During the presentation, I've highlighted certain areas of care which let's say might not require a GP visit. For example, a repeat prescription, something that can be done over the phone, and there are lots and lots of areas. But clearly, there are clinical areas where a patient will need to see a GP. So what I've seen in recent months, and definitely in recent years, but definitely an acceleration in recent months, is the emergence of private GP clinics. So whereas most GPs, if we take the UK example you gave, you'll have the what we used to be called the PCTs, now the integrated care boards, which are typically NHS funded GPs. They're at capacity, and so what you're seeing is an emergence in certain parts of England, at least, are private GP clinics, to address that, where a patient will pay a significant fee, but it'll be a slightly longer visit, and we'll have that patient face-to-face piece that you've rightly identified.
And I guess if people can afford that, that's great at easing the pressure from the public system for those who can't. We've got lots of questions coming through. Quite an interesting one from Clive Bullen. How much is happening on digital prevention in healthcare rather than cure?
Sasha, just to help, I think that's a good question, Clive. Sasha, can you go back to, if Sasha's still there, please, go back to the page, back 2 more, please, and 1 more. Okay, so it's a very good question. So if we look at the second oval from the left on the top line and the second oval from the left on the second line, so companies, disease management is an area that's, well, is it prevention, is it cure? It's helping patients to stay out of hospital. So maybe patients with diabetes, with COPD, which stands for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, so it's a respiratory problem that's quite common. Companies, in this case, M and Cree, I think you pronounce it, it's a Swedish business. These are companies that help clinicians with aftercare and the management of chronic conditions. Carology, I suppose it's not a great example, Clive, I'll try and find another one in a second, but Carology helps some of the biggest NHS cancer hospitals with helping patients after they leave hospital as an inpatient care to stay out of hospital, to help them with their medication and their recovery process. So they are companies that are appearing, they're all well established, well funded, and definitely to the question, how many companies are we seeing, how much activity are we seeing in that prevention piece? A lot, definitely a lot more than previously, and it's an area that will continue to grow.
On that note, Ted Rees says there appears to be a lot of growth with a lot of growth will come from fairly ordinary resource management type tools rather than more innovative areas like robotic surgery. Is that the case?
Can you say the question again, please, Charlotte?
So a lot of the digital growth will come from fairly ordinary resource management tools rather than innovative things like robotic surgery.
I completely agree. I think that's aligned to the point I made earlier around the middle office. So helping hospital resource, so management capacity to do more, because it's becoming a very heavy, very resource heavy role to run hospitals, to respond to regulatory, to respond to new policy requirements. So I completely agree that there's a proliferation of solutions in that resource management space, and dare I say it, the software as a solution and online solutions will be, they'll be slightly more applicable and easier to deploy than a complex robotic surgery, which will involve clinicians or operating theatres and a myriad of other stakeholders at the clinical level. So I completely agree with that point.
And I guess it's not as challenging on the regulation front as well. And then Ben Schlossman has said, you've sort of mentioned clinical practice areas like virtual GP visits, on-call nursing. Are there other clinical areas that might naturally benefit more from digital care?
So I'm going to ask Sasha, if Sasha doesn't mind going back to that other page. So it's only helpful to sort of demonstrate the clinical areas. The same one with the, up one more, there we go. So are there other areas? So I put in a few dots there to cover myself. So look, virtual wards is a phrase that some of our participants today might have heard of. It's where any a range of solutions are used to help the patient receive care as if they were in a ward, as in on a hospital ward. This can range from phone call, a text regarding having taken medication, regarding follow-up. There's a myriad of communication and follow-up type solutions. So I think virtual ward is a very broad term that nobody's really lifted the bonnet on just yet. But it's an area that I'm confident we'll see more on, because it enables hospitals to discharge patients who do want to get home, but with an element of follow-up, that the hospital can be confident that the patient, discharged on Thursday isn't back in on Monday because of a medication that was missed, or some follow-up that wasn't followed through. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question fully for Ben, Charlotte, but I think yes, that there are many other areas that will benefit from these solutions.
And then, how do you see large language models like ChatGPT affecting the digital care industry?
I might duck that one, Charlotte. I think I've been to a few events recently where ChatGPT was shown and how it was used for medical education, for example, as in a professor needed to prepare some materials for a lecture, and used the ChatGPT function, and by their own admission, they only had to spend about maybe 30 minutes at the end topping and tailing what had come back. So I have to confess, I'm not following it very closely. I do recognise the incredible capability of those solutions, and so it's one that will give regulators an absolute headache as to how to use and recognise them. But I think it's early days. It will have a role. So maybe coming back to the point I made at the very beginning, if we break down artificial intelligence into even simpler chunks, such as an algorithm that does some predictive, as in Alan had such and such a condition 3 years ago, so there's a X% likelihood based on empirical evidence that he'll have it again or will have a related condition. Like, I believe that'll be used. But as to some of the more newer deployments of AI, I think we're still in our infancy in terms of how they'll be used.
Yeah, so no AI GPs or consultants for a while, but certainly help with research and bringing numbers together. Peter Brindle has said, how are innovators managing to convince payers that their product will provide a strong return on investment, or preferably rapid savings, as innovations are by definition relatively untested and they do present risk to the buyer as well as the user?
In terms of how, the pitch is typically helping that the solution will help a clinician to see more patients more effectively through better data and better access. The real question on how is that typically there'll be a pilot, and as someone said recently, there are more pilots in the healthcare system than in all the airlines put together. But it is a very much a proof of concept in a lot of new areas. So there are very few, to Peter's question, there are very few big bang rollouts in any of this, because you're dealing with the highly regulated, very, sometimes very complex areas of care. So there is, I think I had the word caution earlier in the presentation. So nobody's running to this in top gear. It is very much phased and caution. So to answer the question, it's demonstrating proof of concept, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And then there's a tweak or an agile addressing of the approach, and then the project is re-rolled out.
Okay, and another question here, and again from Ben Schlossman. So what have been the main drivers of many companies in this space experiencing down rounds, like you say? Is this just market sentiment giving the tech sell-off that you mentioned, or is there other things going on?
I think all of the above. So definitely the market sell-off is a natural influencer, which none of us can ignore. I think the point I was hopefully making earlier is that a lot of the private younger companies do have genuinely very effective solutions, and sadly some of them don't see the light of day because they run out of funding, or because, speaking openly, the management or the owners don't address those funding needs early on. So if obviously a company can demonstrate its revenues and has a secure relationship on its software as a service relationship, for example, where you can predict revenues even if they're early, that obviously does convince an investor. So it's a number of topics that need to be hit and met, which I think I covered some of them on the next page in terms of what it takes to succeed as a digital care provider.
I guess on that note, if you were a private investor, would you be investing in digital care startups?
So I have to say yes, because if we don't, the healthcare workforce is only going to be under even more pressure. The funding of care is going to get even worse and more challenging for both state funding and private funding. So digital care is essential to the sustainability of helping our workforce see more patients, and helping our state and privately funded or let's say private insurer type solutions to look after patients. So yes is the answer. And if anyone wants, obviously I've left, participants are more than welcome to have a look at the slides, but the criteria I included on the last or penultimate page would be key things I would have as a checklist when looking at opportunities.
Yeah, I guess obviously as well as the increased demand, the needs of patients are going to get more complex, so a lot more investment is needed. And then I think we've got time for one more question. So on the other hand, you did touch on some of the policy trends towards the end of your presentation. How can policymakers make sure they're aligned with best practice?
What was the last word? How can they be aligned with best practice? Best practice. Oh yeah. Okay. Some simple ways which I think most of us will recognise, especially from attending events like today, thought leadership conferences, where you have a leading clinician or a leading technologist that demonstrates case studies. So, I mean, I speaking openly, from the month of April till, say, mid of April until middle of June, I do attend quite a few conferences in this space, and without doubt, every single event has a digital care topic. In fact, the agendas of maybe 2 or 3 years ago might have been around funding and crisis management, whereas now it's all around the latest solution, the next innovation. Also, most of these events will have awards, innovation awards, and you guessed it, Charlotte, typically the winner is a digital care solution that helps the clinician to see more patients and more effectively. So I think sharing of knowledge via thought leadership conferences, and obviously some conferences will be simple trade fairs, and obviously they're important as well. But events where you have a true keynote which has backed up evidence and empirical studies are great ways for policymakers to see the latest and understand what's coming down the line.
Great, thank you. So once again, thank you very much, Alan, for sharing your time and expertise with us today. I think this is a really important topic which we should all try and stay up to date with, and I'm sure when we meet again next year there will be further developments and we can see what's going on. And also thanks for our sponsors for making these webinars possible, and thank you for our audience for logging in and for contributing. And don't forget to check out our forthcoming events on our website. We've got lots more diverse content coming up, including achieving borderless payments on Monday, and then on the Thursday, seamless multi-cloud security and financial services. So digital is continuing to be a big theme across everything at the moment. Thanks everyone, goodbye.
Pleasure. Thank you. Bye now.